What if the secret to being more interesting has almost nothing to do with being interesting?
Almost 90 years ago, Dale Carnegie wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, one of the most influential self-help books ever published. It sold millions of copies and remained on the New York Times bestseller for 10 years. Warren Buffett famously took the Dale Carnegie course when he was just 20 and has said that it had a profound impact on his life. For decades, he even kept the certificate from that course hanging in his office.
But underneath all the techniques and principles in Carnegie's book is one remarkably simple idea. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. You know, most of us walk into conversations wondering consciously or unconsciously, do they like me? Do I sound smart? Am I interesting? What should I say next? Thinking more about, performance rather than connection.
But Carnegie suggested turning that completely around. Instead of trying to be interesting, become interested. But isn't that just another social technique, a clever way to get people to like you, maybe even manipulation? Only if the interest isn't genuine. Because there's a profound difference between performing curiosity and actually being curious about another human being. Modern science is beginning to show us that the difference isn't just philosophical. Something very real happens psychologically, socially, and even neurologically when another person feels genuinely seen, heard, and understood.
So in today's episode, we're going to explore the art of genuine connection, why interest may matter more than charisma, why being heard feels so powerful, and what science can teach us about becoming the kind of person other people naturally want to connect with.
Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast in partnership with NUE, that's NUE, where we explore real tools and stories for building mental strength in the modern world. So feeling heard is the active ingredient. This is like why this matters. You cannot make someone feel close to you by talking. We think that, but we might think that, but that's not how it works. Closeness comes from how you receive what they say, not how well you perform or impress them. The felt sense of this person gets me and actually cares, that's the thing underneath every strong relationship. And it's built in small moments of being received well.
It's a skill, not a warmth trait. And this is the part that matters for the show. Being a great listener is not necessarily like a personality you're born with. It's a set of concrete moves you can train, which is good news for the people it doesn't come naturally to.
Exactly. You don't have to become a warmer person. You have to make about 4 specific moves, and we'll cover all those in this episode.
Yeah, and there was a lot of fascinating research, a lot of a big body of evidence around all of this that we'll dive into now, kind of the research core around all of this. And the first is research around what they called the follow-up question. And what happened is a Harvard team ran a set of studies on question asking. And one of them was a real speed dating event. That was like the focus of the study. So they wired up speed daters, recorded every conversation, and had each person say afterward whether they wanted a second date. Then they trained an algorithm to count follow-up questions, the questions that, build on what the other person just said as opposed to, shifting to a brand new topic. And the result was clean. The people who asked more follow-up questions got more yeses for a second date. And here's the kicker. When they asked people beforehand whether asking more questions would make them more likable, people didn't actually think it would. So we badly underrate it.
I love that. Just in a speed dating, I've never done speed dating, but I know what it is. Such a quick interaction between two people, and just the people that asked the follow-up question. Just that alone was the number one predictor of people being interested in the second date.
No, exactly. A good analogy here is the first question you ask knocks on the door. The second question, or those follow-up questions, is you actually stepping inside the door. So, everybody knocks, but almost nobody walks in.
It's a great analogy. And here's what's interesting about why this works. So the reason that follow-ups land is that they make the other person feel understood. And researchers have a name for that: responsiveness. So there's these safety net questions. Responsiveness is the sense that the person you're talking to is listening, that they get you, they value you, and they actually care. And so you can't announce that about yourself. You don't just say, I'm caring and we have shared values. You demonstrate it. And a follow-up question is the fastest way to demonstrate it, because it's proof that you've processed what they've said. And instead of waiting to talk, you actually heard what they said and have a follow-up question. And it's important to note that in the research, a follow-up question is not just asking a second question. A follow-up question is asking a question related to something they shared. So it's not just, I'm going to have my 3 or 4 questions memorized, and I'm just going to ask a bunch of questions sequentially. It's I ask a question, and then the follow-up is based on something they said. So you can't prepare it. So an analogy is feeling heard is like catching your reflection in a clear mirror instead of like a funhouse one. People relax around anyone who reflects them back accurately instead of in a distorted way.
And then there's more research around celebrating the good news. And in the research, this is one of the most counterintuitive studies of the bunch. How you respond to someone's good news actually matters more than how you respond to their bad news.
This surprised me the most, honestly, because I would have thought meaningful connection is how you express empathy from someone's like hard times. But anyway, I'll keep going. But this was fascinating to me.
Yeah, super counterintuitive. So a researcher named Shelley Gable videotaped around 79 dating couples talking through both good news and bad news, and then checked back 2 months later to see who was still together. The response to good news predicted who stayed together better than the response to bad news did. So in the study, she found 4 ways people react to good news. One is they're genuinely engaged and curious. 2 is, they just give a flat, generic, like, oh, that's nice. The other is pointing out the downside of the good news, which is interesting. And then the 4th that she saw or categorizes is that, and then barely looking up. Like the people just weren't engaged. They were barely looking up. And here's the thing, only the first one, the genuinely engaged and curious one, actually built the relationship out of those 4 categories. And notice what engaged and curious looks like in practice. It's asking the second question about their win, the good news.
Interesting.
Right? So when someone hands you good news, you can catch it and throw it back higher, or you can let it drop. But the friendship is built in the catching of the good news.
I love that. And I mean, initially it's counterintuitive, but I guess when I sit and think about it,
Yeah.
we all want someone to celebrate our good news with us. When we've had a win, something, whatever it is, and someone who's like really excited, genuinely excited about it, and they show that by asking follow-up questions instead of just going, oh yeah, that's great, that's awesome, good job. Versus like, oh wow, like tell me more about it. Like how did that feel? Or like how long you been doing this or whatever. So initially it's counterintuitive, but it it makes sense to me the more I think about it. Then there's another thing in the research that we saw, and that's listening changes the person. So good listening isn't you just being quiet until it's your turn to talk. Researchers have actually shown it actually changes the person who's talking when they perceive that the person is genuinely listening. So in a line of studies on high quality listening, when people felt genuinely and non-judgmentally listened to, their defensiveness dropped, they felt safer, and then they actually thought more clearly and less rigidly about whatever they're describing. So listening isn't passive. It isn't a favor. It's an intervention. You can help someone just by making them feel heard. It puts them at ease, and they can start to communicate better. And it costs you nothing but your attention. So a good analogy is like a good listener is a whetstone, and the other person gets sharper just from being heard against you. And you really barely had to do anything other than maybe resist the urge to just keep talking or look at your phone or your watch or something.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. I mean, the term I'm familiar with that I think is in line with this is active listening, the skill of active listening.
Yes.
I think that's a term that a lot of us are familiar with, right? That goes right in line with that research. So there's one last body of research or a concept found in the research, and it's you're more liked than you think. And there's a well-documented effect called the liking gap. So across several experiments, researchers found that after conversations, people consistently underestimated how much the other person liked them and enjoyed the conversation. And the reason is that we walk away typically replaying our own performance and, picking it apart. So we're too busy self-critiquing to notice the signals that the other person actually had a good time in the conversation. So you're probably landing better than you think most of the time, which means that second question and thinking less about your performance and really focusing on the other person isn't a risk. You should do it. You should ask the second question. And one way to think about that is when you walk out of a conversation, some people you're just watching your own blooper reel. You're replaying the conversation like, oh man, did I sound super dumb when I said that? Or like you're just self-critiquing and looking at yourself. And they may very well be walking out thinking, that was great. I really enjoyed that conversation with Dave, right? So it's the same conversation, but two totally different screenings or perspectives.
Yeah, I think another way to say it is that it's less about style and more about just being genuinely interested. And so instead of critiquing, did I word that the right way? Did I say it the right way? It's just like, if you showed interest in the other person, they're going to walk away having liked the interaction, instead of worrying exactly about the style of the way you ask the question or whatever. I think that's a takeaway.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going as well. Is you're not trying to be impressive. That's not the goal. You're trying to make the other person feel like the most interesting one in the room, and if you do that, you're the one they remember. That's a key ingredient for genuine connection is making them feel like the most interesting one in the room, and not you yourself trying to be impressive.
Yeah. What's interesting is, I think another part of the research that we read about was someone observing a conversation between two people. When the listener is asking follow-up questions, the person observing doesn't think that the person asking the questions is being liked or perceived that way, but the person who's being heard, who's receiving those follow-up questions, basically the person who's talking, and you have a really good listener who's asking follow-up questions, and then you have a third party watching the conversation. The third party person says, oh yeah, that was nothing special. But the person who received all those follow-up questions feels very differently about it than someone who observed it. And that's what's kind of to the point you just made. You're trying to make that person feel like the most interesting person in the room. And only they feel it because they're the ones that be receiving those follow-up questions.
And it's interesting. I mean, you just think of us as individuals, like so many things we do, whether it's consuming social media or watching a talk show on TV, like we're the audience. So we see performers. So then we try to mirror performative behavior, right? So it's not about performing at all.
Yeah, well, and if this is that powerful and that simple, then why does almost nobody do it? And I think the part of the reason is we're wired to relate by comparison. So someone tells us about their trip and our brain instantly serves up our trip. or they tell us about something they've accomplished and we think, oh, I've done that same thing. And that reflex, it feels like connecting. Oh yeah, me too. I've done that too. I'm important like you. But really it quietly moves the spotlight off of them and onto us. And I mean, I think that that's one of the biggest problems is we things that they're saying bring up memories of us, and we think, oh, I have something relevant to chime in here. But that's not the goal. The goal is to have them feel heard and to continue to ask follow-up questions.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the fix isn't trying harder to care. It's just installing a couple specific moves so the good instinct wins over the reflex you were just talking about, Dave. So you don't have to feel more interested. You have to act interested in a few defined ways, which we'll get into right now. And then the genuine feeling tends to follow.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into the framework itself, the actual tool. The framework name is the one more question rule. And this is a 3-step framework. First is notice the pull. That's catching the urge to make it about you. So when you're in a conversation, watch for that moment when you just want to jump in with your own version of me too. Like I've been there, I've done that. That urge is the cue. So you don't have to fight it. You just notice that cue. That's step 1.
Step 2 is hold the floor open, meaning you leave the spotlight on them just a bit longer, right? You're catching that reflex and you're holding the floor open. So instead of taking your turn or think it's about taking your turn, stay with what they just said. Don't fill the space with yourself. Give them room to keep going and go a bit deeper into what they just said.
Yeah. And then the third step is ask one more question. A single genuine follow-up before you talk about yourself. Just ask a question that builds on their last answer, not a new topic. Like what was the best part, or what made you decide that, or what were you feeling in that moment when that happened, or something like that. Then actually listen to the answer.
Yeah, and the goal isn't, a deep conversation on command, right? It's more simple. It's just one honest follow up before you make it about you, and counting the rep instead of rating how connected you felt. Connection is a trained thing. You shouldn't necessarily be like scoring yourself on this, but you do it consistently, and the deeper conversation just starts happening naturally on its own.
Yeah. So like a key principle is one thing that every listener can do today is in your next conversation, ask exactly one more question than you normally would. And then listen to the answer before you say anything about yourself. Don't grade the conversation. Just count whether or not you asked another question. That's the entire rep. In practice, this is hard to do because we're so trained in a conversation, like someone says something, or we ask a question and they give us an answer, and then we, like make a comment, or we say, oh yeah, I've done that before, and say something about ourselves, hoping they'll ask us a question. And so it's really not easy to do, but you'll surprise in a positive way. You'll surprise someone if you just keep asking questions. And then the other one is just really killing the me too. When you feel that urge to jump in with your own version, you just got to notice it, and you just got to hold the floor. And this is really hard when they're talking about something that we're really excited about. And there's a time when you share about yourself, but you ask a few questions first to make sure you hear them, and then you, later in the conversation you can connect with them on having a shared experience. But you first want to understand their experience.
Yeah, and I think a key thing here is that these are skills. These are skills that can be trained. You don't have to be natural at this, right? So going back to that research, another thing you could do is run the good news test and just practice that in conversation. When someone shares a win, get curious out loud. Ask them to tell you the best part. Don't just say, "Oh, nice, that's nice," and change the subject, right? So the good news test is another thing you can practice.
Yeah, think about this. Just put yourself in the shoes. You have really good news and you walk in and you have some friends or colleagues or loved ones or whatever, and you're like, guess what just happened? And you share some good news and everyone's like, oh, that's great. I'm so happy for you. And that's good. But like, imagine how different it is when you walk in and they're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's awesome. Tell me about that. Like, now, when did this happen? Just now? Okay. Like, how long you been working on that? Wow. Like, how did you hear? Did they call you or did they text you, or, oh, you just got an email? Read us the email. Like, and when someone shows that kind of interest, it makes that experience 10 times more enjoyable. It can almost be deflating when you share some really big news and someone's just like, that's awesome. Congratulations. And that's it.
No, it's true. And you always remember those people that celebrate you, right? And by celebrating you, they're doing exactly what you just said, Dave. Like they're digging deeper and like savoring that moment with you.
Yeah. And then another one is reflecting before you respond. So like, say a version of what you heard back to them. So the part that, got you was this, it proves that you were listening there. Like, if you don't have a follow-up question, just mirror back. Someone says, I just got promoted at work. And you're just like, you just got promoted at work, like just now?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just mirror back. And then that invites them to open up and share more detail. But that also gives you more time to kind of think about like how you might respond. You don't even have to have a question other than just mirroring back what they said.
That's true. I mean, that's a good skill in just communication in general is, you don't have to fill the space of like silence. Like it's okay for there even to be a second of silence, because our knee-jerk reaction, as a lot of times, is to fill all silence. Like silence is uncomfortable, right? So it's okay to mirror back and not have an immediate response. Like you're basically fighting the reflex, right? You want to reflect and genuinely respond, not just react. And then just giving your attention fully. We all know when we've experienced this with people, and you can feel it when you especially think of phones, right? Like this is so common in today's society where everyone is glued to their phones. You're sitting across the table with your spouse or a friend or something, and you're nodding your head and like, oh, that's cool, right? So like the phone is a huge barrier. So put that thing in your hand down, and presence is most of the battle. If you're present with someone, that's the win. Like a lot of this will just come naturally, and it's visible.
And the cool thing about all this is none of this requires you to be smarter or funnier or more interesting. It just requires you to want the other person to feel heard more than you want to talk. That's the whole discipline. Is the goal in the conversation is to have the other person feel more heard than you want to talk. And developing that skill, going back to, kind of just what we shared at the beginning, you can make more friends in 2 months by being interested in other people than you can in 2 years of trying to get people interested in you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just so true. But there's some pitfalls. There's some things that we can do that can backfire here. Why don't you walk us through some of those, Luke?
Yeah, I think one of the easiest pitfalls you could fall into is you thinking you have to ask all these follow-up questions, and then you're kind of turning it into an interrogation, right? You don't want to go into interrogation mode. You heard ask questions, and then you just start turning this into a checklist and firing them off without really listening to any of the answers. So, instead of interrogating, let the next question come from what they actually just said. Again, actively listen, and a real follow-up proves you listened. So, don't be scripted. It shouldn't feel like a job interview. And if you do that, people can tell, right?
Yeah, the interrogation mode is interesting. It's just, and we've probably all experienced that where you talk to someone they just can't stop asking you questions, and you're like, wow, that's a little bit too much. And, generally we ask too few questions about people, but you have to, and I think the main thing, like you just said, Luke, is If the follow-up questions are related to what they said, then it's less likely to feel like an interrogation. But if you have a pre-scripted list of all these questions and you just keep going through them and keep coming up with new questions, then it can feel, like you said, like an interrogation. And then we talked about this already, but the other one is the one-up.
Mm-hmm.
It's so normal. We're wired this way, but to relate by comparison, we think that that's connecting. Someone shares this experience and you've had the same experience. And so you just say, oh, me too. Or like, oh yeah, I did that. But particularly if it's in sort of like a one-up way, like, oh, I did that. You did that once, I did it twice. Or, oh, you're telling them, they're telling you about their really cool trip to Italy. And you're like, I used to live in Italy. And you're like, oh, you're just kind of taking out the wind of their sails. And like that can come later, like sharing that information and connecting on a shared experience is good. But like first ask some follow-up questions, like resist that urge. Let their story, there's a reason they're saying that. And so you like let their story be it. Like stay curious about their story. Really, was this your first time in Italy? Like how long were you there? What was your favorite part? And then, oh, my favorite part was the food. Really, what about the food? You know, does it similar to what you thought, like Olive Garden, is it the same as the food in Italy or, you know, whatever? But you keep focus on their story. And then at some point later, you can be like, I've actually been to Italy too. And I've had similar experiences with you. And then that can be a shared experience, but you just got to resist that urge before the follow-up questions, before they've felt heard, to one up their story or their experience.
Yeah, that is a very natural reflex. That's a good point. Another one, we don't really talk about this, but it's around like fixing instead of hearing. So, you know, I think this is another natural instinct for a lot of people is advice feels helpful, and jumping to it when they say something is sometimes more comfortable than just sitting with what they said, especially when you have like a lived experience in the domain they're talking about, right? You want to immediately jump to advice, but ask before you advise. And often the that second question is the help, not the solution you are reaching for. So the second question is more helpful than any advice you can just give them.
I would even take this one step further. If someone's coming to you for advice, even then,
yes,
ask sufficient questions so that they feel heard and understood, and so that you actually understand the situation before even offering the advice. But someone shares something and they've come to you for advice, and it's really easy. That's what their purpose is, to just jump into advice. But I think the main idea is that before there can be connection, someone has to feel understood and that you're genuinely interested in them. And there's no better way to understand someone, and there's no better way to show genuine interest in someone else than asking follow-up questions based on what they've said. So that's fixing. Another one is just the performative listening. We nod and say, oh yeah, while we're like really just loading our next response, and we think that counts. The thing is, people are pretty good at detecting that, you know. What we just really need to get in the habit of actually tracking what they're saying. And people feel the difference. Being heard and being politely waited out are not the same thing. And I can think of someone in particular who just wants really bad to like ask a lot of questions and be that connected person, but this person just has tried to develop the skill of just asking a ton of questions. But the tell is the follow-up questions aren't related to something I've said when I'm talking with this person. So I say stuff, and so I can tell they're not listening because they'll sometimes ask the same question over and over, or they'll ask a question that I just answered. And so it's performative listening can backfire when we're trying to portray this feeling of listening, but we're not genuinely listening.
Yeah, and I like when you said you could take it a step further on the advice giving when someone can come to you seeking advice. And there's some nuance there, because another pitfall is turning into a therapist, for lack of better words. So, if someone's coming to you advice maybe, or even not, over correcting on the advice. So we go heavy with a slow and, oh, how did that make you feel? Right? Like your job's not to turn into a therapist. Those aren't necessarily the kind of questions. That's not your role, right? So just keeping it natural and warm, having genuine curiosity. You're a curious friend. You're not a clinician. So the goal is a real conversation, not a session. Everything we talk about on this show, the science, the frameworks, the habits, New is where you actually put it into practice. New is the mental fitness app built to help you reflect, notice patterns, and build real mental strength and capacity over time. It remembers what you're working on and meets you where you are. Not therapy, not toxic positivity, just a daily practice for your mental fitness. If you're watching this, scan the QR code on screen. If you're listening, head to talkwithnew.com. That's talkwithnue.com.
I'm just thinking through my own life of the people that I've met that have made me feel the most important or the most special. And it's not the people that tell the most impressive stories. It's not the people who've done the coolest things. I mean, I might admire people like that, but the people that make me feel really good are ones that are just genuinely interested in me. And for me, when I read How to Win Friends and Influence People decades ago, and I've tried to apply its principles throughout my life. And I kind of came to this question at times like, are these we talked about this at the beginning, but are these just manipulation techniques? Is this just how you get people to like you? But what I realized is you can't fake it. When we talked about, you just talked about performative listening, people can tell the difference. The key is actually becoming interested in other people, like being interested. It starts by developing these skills, like the one more question, asking the follow-up that's related to what they said, resisting the urge to say, like, that's how it starts. But at the end of the day, people who are genuinely interested in other people are going to make more friends, and they're going to be able to connect easily with other people. And if you're not interested in someone else, like, you can develop the skill and it can help you. But at the end of the day, you really have to derive a genuine interest in the other person. Otherwise, eventually it's felt, the insincerity is felt.
Yeah, that's true. It made me think, early in my career, a lot of my career has been in the revenue side of software businesses and in sales and stuff. And it's interesting. I mean, sales has such a stigma to it. You think of a salesperson like they're just manipulative and they're just trying to get you to sign so they can make commission or whatever, right? But one thing I do know, and I've seen from experience, is the best salespeople are really good at this. And the best salespeople are genuinely active listeners and seeking genuine connection. They're not going through a list of 10 questions, and they're not just, filling out an order form, right? Like the best salespeople are truly great active listeners, and they're really genuine. And that leads to the best business relationships by far, is the people that do this really, really well. Then the other thing I think that gets in the way of this more than ever, and for people on video, I'm holding up, or not on video, I'm holding up my phone on the screen. I think technology is probably one of the biggest barriers here, and the phone in your hand. So just put the phone down. I've seen people that do this intentionally and connect with you without their phone in their hand or on the table, right? Like, you can feel the difference to someone that's just like kind of there and nodding their head. And
I was going to say, I'm glad you mentioned not on the table when you said put the phone down, because when you're sitting with a conversation and someone puts their phone down on the table, what that communicates to me, and what I think that communicates to most people, is I'm here listening, but like my phone is close, it's ready, and if it buzzes or it lights up, like I'm gonna grab it. I think putting the phone away, out of sight, like not in your hand, not on the table. I actually have come to I found it actually really rude when I'm having a conversation and someone puts their phone down on the table, because what they've just told me is I'm listening until the phone grabs my attention.
Yeah. Until that notification pops up and then I peek at it. Yeah.
I kind of had as we were thinking about this, I had a funny example. Years ago, I was a missionary in East Germany, and I was training a new missionary, and his German wasn't as good, but that wasn't the main issue. I talked to everyone where we went, and I just enjoyed talking to people, whether we were on the streetcar or walking around the street. And that was something that he struggled with, and he asked me, he said, how do you do that? How do you talk to someone? And like, what do you say? And I was like, well, you just talk about something that about their interesting. He was like, but I don't know them. They're strangers. How do you talk? And I was like, we were in a particular city in East Germany, Leipzig, and people in that city are really proud to be from Leipzig and has a really rich history. And so I said, well, ask them if they're from here. And they'll most likely say yes. And if they do, then, just say like, wow, I'm new here, but I really like this city. Like how long have you lived? You've lived here your whole life? Like, what's your favorite part of the city? Something like that. Right. And I just asked, it's just small talk. Just tell me about yourself a little bit. Tell me about where you're from. And so I saw him try this once, and we got on a streetcar, and he sat down next to this lady, and he was really nervous. And after like a couple minutes, a little bit awkward, instead of initiating it right when he sat down, he just turned next to her and he just said, "Are you from here?" And she looked at him and said, "Yes." And then the conversation ended. He didn't ask a follow-up question. It was a perfect cue to be like, oh, like, this is a great city. Like, tell me something about it, something. But then the conversation ended, and it was just kind of a funny real life example. But one thing I did learn from that experience is just being genuinely interested in people, and you ask something about them, and you follow up on that, and you find something they're interested in, and you keep talking about the things they're interested in, and then a real connection develops. And at some point in a conversation, genuine curiosity develops on the person who's being heard. And they're like, man, I really like this. This person's really hearing me out. Who is this person? And then they inevitably, at some point in the conversation, that turns and they ask about you. And then when both sides experience that, then there's real meaningful connection. But we just circumvent that process by thinking, okay, I asked them one question, now it's my turn to talk, instead of like that follow-up and the follow-up to the follow-up, and like digging in a little bit and having a real experience where they felt heard. And then the time will happen in the conversation when the focus will change and you can talk a little bit about you, but don't talk too long, reflect back to them, and continue to ask follow-up questions.
Well, I'm curious, was he like a new missionary? And I'm asking because this is a trainable skill, right? Like, did you ever see him again? Did he improve after that?
He did. And I think there was a compounding factor that he was homeschooled his whole life, which is great. One of the what a lot of my friends who homeschool do is they homeschool junior high, elementary, and then in high school, the kids go to high school for socialization. And when a kid's homeschooled all the way through high school, sometimes, not always, some parents do a better job with this, but sometimes it's just some of those social skills, some of the skills when you're in 7th or 8th grade or 9th grade or 10th grade, and you're trying to get to know someone, those skills are a little bit underdeveloped. So great guy, really genuine, really nice, really smart, a little bit underdeveloped in sort of some of that small talk and initially meeting people. But yeah, I did run into him later, and he ended up being a fantastic missionary and with the ability to talk to people. This was just at the very beginning, kind of the out of his comfort zone kind of time.
He was kind of thrown into the fire. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay, so this is the Mental Fitness Podcast, but we're talking about how to ask good follow-up questions in a conversation. What does this have to do with mental fitness, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key pillars of mental fitness for listeners that have listened to episodes and understand our philosophy around mental fitness is connection to others. So this is actually a huge part, because this is a skill that could be trained in order for you to have genuine connection. I mean, as humans, we're hardwired to connect with others. So if you can improve and have genuine connection with those around you and those you meet and those in your circle, like that's a massive way to lift your mental fitness and increase the baseline. But it's specifically on connection to others. What would you say, Dave?
No, that's exactly right. Connect, like you just mentioned, our connection to others is essential for our own individual mental health. So to be mentally fit, we have to have meaningful connection ourselves, health and vitality, but we have to have meaningful connections with others. And if that's an area of your life that's lacking, that needs improvement, this is a concrete skill that can be trained, that can be developed, that can be applied to increase and improve the meaningful connections with others in your life. That's how it fits into mental fitness.
Well, let's do a quick recap of this episode. Connection is built by being interested, not by you being interesting. And the real move here that we've been talking about, the move is the second question. One real follow-up before you make it about you.
Yeah, we got to kill the me too. Celebrate the good news that someone else is, reflect it back to them, give full attention to them and their story, and kill the me too. And count that. Count how often you can do that. And if you could take one thing from today, it's this. In your next conversation, ask one more question than you normally would, and then actually listen to the answer. That's it. That's the entire skill. It's the smallest possible rep, and it has the biggest return on connection of almost anything that we've covered on this show.
Yeah, be the person who asks the second question. And you'll be amazed how fast people start telling you they feel close to you when all you did was get curious. If this episode hit home for you, please do us a favor and leave a rating or review wherever you're listening. It takes about 30 seconds, and it's genuinely the most powerful way to help this show reach people who need it. Share it with someone who could use it, leave a rating, and we'll see you next week.